A Neighbor's Choice returns. So let's get to the second story that Facebook tried to censor me from expressing and sharing with my folks on that platform, which is from Politico. So again, Politico is a state-submitted, establishment-friendly outlet. This is not a platform that is anti-establishment. This is a platform which is extremely comfortable with carrying the water for establishment voices, just like ABC News. If you're listening on one of our radio affiliates that we use, ABC News, you'll notice that they were saying, Biden is so great. He just did this stimulus bill. And can you believe it? Not one Republican wanted to stand with him. Can you believe it? And they say the Republicans aren't for it. But guess what? Our poll said 41% of Republicans supported this bill. So that's about half, isn't it? So that's like 100% of Democrats and almost half of Republicans. That's what ABC just communicated. This is how pathetic these media outlets are. They try to act like they're media outlets. All they are PR firms for one narrow, bigoted, outdated, stinky narrative of groupthink that's failing us everywhere we look. But this story in Politico, another state media-friendly outlet, says, in 2018, diplomats warned of risky coronavirus experiments in a Wuhan lab. No one listened. After seeing a risky lab, they wrote a cable warning to Washington, but it was ignored. This was published just 3 days ago by Josh Rogan. On January 15th, in its last days, President Donald Trump's State Department put out a statement with serious claims about the origins of the COVID-19 pandemic. The statement said the U.S. intelligence community had evidence that several researchers at the Wuhan Institute of Virology Laboratory were sick with COVID-like symptoms in autumn 2019, implying the Chinese government had hidden crucial information about the outbreak for months. And that the Wuhan lab, the WIV lab, despite presenting itself as a civilian institution, was conducting secret research projects with the Chinese military. The State Department alleged a Chinese government cover-up and asserted that Beijing continues today to withhold vital information that scientists need to protect the world from this deadly virus and the next one. The exact origin of the new coronavirus remains a mystery to this day, but did you watch our Steve Hilton interview, by the way? But the search for answers is not just about assigning blame. Unless the source is located, the true path of the virus can't be traced, and scientists can't properly study the best ways to prevent future outbreaks. Politico goes on to say the original Chinese government story that the pandemic spread from a seafood market in Wuhan was the first and therefore most widely accepted theory, but cracks in that theory slowly emerged throughout the late winter and spring of 2020. The first known case of COVID-19 in Wuhan, it was revealed in February, had no connection to the market. The Chinese government closed the market in January and sanitized it before proper samples could be taken. It wouldn't be until May that the Chinese Centers for Disease Control disavowed the market theory, admitting that it had no idea how the outbreak began. But by then, it had become the story of record in China and internationally. In the spring of 2020, inside the U.S. government, some officials began to see and collect evidence of a different, perhaps more troubling theory, that the outbreak had a connection to one of the laboratories in Wuhan. Among them, the WIV, a world-leading center of research on bat coronaviruses. To some inside the government, the name of the laboratory was familiar. Its research on bat viruses had already drawn the attention of U.S. diplomats and officials at the Beijing embassy in late 2017, prompting them to alert Washington that the lab's own scientists had reported, quote, a serious shortage of appropriately trained technicians and investigators needed to safely operate this high containment laboratory, unquote. But their cables to Washington were ignored. When I published the warnings from these cables in April 2020, they added fuel to a debate that had already gone from a scientific and forensic question to a hot-button political issue as the previously internal U.S. government debate over the lab's possible connection spilled into public view. The next day, Trump said he was investigating, and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo called on Beijing to come clean about the origin of the outbreak. 2 weeks later, Pompeo said there was, quote, enormous evidence pointing to the lab, but he didn't provide any of said evidence. As Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping relationship unraveled and administration officials openly blamed the Wuhan lab, the U.S.-China relationship only went further downhill. As the pandemic set in worldwide, the origin story was largely set aside in the public coverage of the crisis. But the internal government debate continued, now over whether the United States should release more information about what it knew about the lab and its possible connection to the outbreak. The January 15th statement was cleared by the intelligence community, but the underlying data was still held secret. Likely changing no minds, it was meant as a signal showing that circumstantial evidence did exist and that the theory deserved further investigation. Now the new Joe Biden team is walking a tightrope, calling on Beijing to release more data while declining to endorse or dispute the Trump administration's controversial claims. The origin story remains entangled both in domestic politics and U.S.-China relations. Last month, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan issued a statement expressing deep concerns about a forthcoming report from a team assembled by the World Health Organization that toured Wuhan, even visiting the lab, but was denied crucial data by the Chinese authorities. But more than 4 years ago, long before this question blew up into an international point of tension between China and the United States, the story started with a simple warning. In late 2017, top health and science officials at the U.S. Embassy in Beijing attended a conference in the Chinese capital. There, they saw a presentation on a new study put out by a group of Chinese scientists, including several from the Wuhan lab, in conjunction with the U.S. National Institutes of Health. Since the 2002 outbreaks of SARS, the deadly disease caused by a coronavirus transmitted by bats in China, scientists around the world had been looking for ways to predict and limit future outbreaks of similar diseases. To aid the effort, the NIH had funded a number of projects that involved the WIV scientists, including much of the Wuhan lab's work with bat coronaviruses. The new study was entitled Discovery of a Rich Gene Pool of Bat SARS-Related Coronaviruses provides new insights into the origins of SARS coronavirus. These researchers, the American officials learned, had found a population of bats from caves in Yunnan province that gave insight into how SARS coronaviruses originated and spread. The researchers boasted that they may have found the cave where the original SARS coronavirus originated. But all the U.S. diplomats cared about was that these scientists had discovered 3 new viruses that had a unique characteristic. They contained a spike protein that was particularly good at grabbing onto a specific receptor in human lung cells known as an ACE2 receptor. That means the viruses were potentially very dangerous for humans, and that these viruses were now in a lab with which the U.S. diplomats, were largely unfamiliar. Knowing the significance of the Wuhan virologist's discovery, and knowing that the WIV's top-level biosafety laboratory was relatively new, the U.S. Embassy health and science officials in Beijing decided to go to Wuhan and check it out. In total, the embassy sent 3 teams of experts in late 2017 and early 2018 to meet with the WIV scientists. Among them, Shi Zhengli, often referred to as the Batwoman because of her extensive experience studying coronaviruses found in bats. Now, you would have known all this if you had watched our interview with Steve Hilton, which is available on aneighborschoice.com. He's the Fox News host who's been investigating this story and laid out the facts with a groundbreaking hour interview with me earlier this week. But this Politico article is pretty amazing because it's being pretty accurate based on the facts that I've been able to see independently from other outlets and sources. When they sat down with the scientists at the WIV, Politico says the American diplomats were shocked by what they heard. The Chinese researchers told them they didn't have enough properly trained technicians to operate their BSL-4 lab. And that's the biosafety level. The Wuhan scientists were asking for more support to get the lab up to top standards. The diplomats wrote 2 cables to Washington reporting on their visits to the Wuhan lab. More should be done to help the lab meet top safety standards, they said, and they urged Washington to get on it. They also warned that the WIV researchers had found new bat coronaviruses could easily infect human cells and which used the same cellular route that had been used by the original SARS coronavirus. Taken together, those 2 points, a particularly dangerous group of viruses being studied in a lab with real safety problems, were intended as a warning about a potential public health crisis, one of the cable writers told me. They kept the cables unclassified because they wanted more people back home to be able to read and share them, according to the cable writer. But there was no response from State Department headquarters, and they were never made public. And as U.S.-China tensions rose over the course of 2018, American diplomats lost access to labs such as the one at the WIV. The cable was a warning shot, one U.S. official said. They were begging people to pay attention to what was going on. The world would be paying attention soon enough, but by then it would be too late. The cables were not leaked to me by any Trump administration political official, as many in the media wrongly assumed. In fact, Secretary of State Pompeo was angry when he found out about the leak. He needed to keep up the veneer of good relations with China, and these revelations would make that job more difficult. Trump and President Xi had agreed during their March 26th phone call to halt the war of words that had erupted when a Chinese diplomat alleged on Twitter that the outbreak might have been caused by the U.S. Army. That had prompted Trump to start calling it the China virus, deliberately blaming Beijing in a racist way. Xi had warned Trump in that call that China's level of cooperation on releasing critical equipment in America's darkest moment would be jeopardized by continued accusations. After receiving the cables from a source, I called around to get reactions from other American officials I trusted. What I found was that just months into the pandemic, a large swath of the government already believed the virus had escaped from the WIV lab, rather than having leaped from an animal to a human at the Wuhan seafood market or some other random natural setting, as the Chinese government had claimed. Any theory of the pandemic's origins had to account for the fact that the outbreak of the novel coronavirus, or by its official name, SARS-CoV-2, first appeared in Wuhan on the doorstep of the lab that possessed one of the world's largest collection of bat coronaviruses and that possessed the closest known relative of SARS-CoV-2, a virus known as RATG13 that she identified in her lab. She, in her March interview, said that when she was first told about the virus outbreak in her town, she thought the officials had gotten it wrong because she would have guessed that such a virus would break out in southern China, where most of the bats live. I had never expected this kind of thing to happen in Wuhan in central China, she said. By April, U.S. officials at the NSC and the State Department had begun to compile some circumstantial evidence that the WIV lab, rather than the seafood market, was actually the source of the virus. The former explanation for the outbreak was entirely plausible, they felt, whereas the latter would be an extreme coincidence. But the officials couldn't say that out loud because there wasn't firm proof either way. And if the U.S. government accused China of lying about the outbreak without firm evidence, Beijing would surely escalate tensions even more, which meant that Americans might not get the medical supplies that they were desperately needed to combat the rapid spread of the virus in the United States. Arkansas Senator Tom Cotton seemed not to have been concerned about any of those considerations. On February 16th, he had offered a totally unfounded theory of his own, claiming on Fox News that the virus might have come from China's biowarfare program, suggesting, in other words, that it had been engineered deliberately to kill humans. This wasn't supported by any known research. To this day, scientists largely agree that the virus was not engineered to be deadly. SARS-CoV-2 showed no signs of direct genetic manipulation. Furthermore, the WIV lab had published some of its research about coronaviruses that can infect humans, not exactly the level of secrecy you would expect for a clandestine weapons program. As Cotton's speculation vaulted the origin story into the news in an incendiary new way, He undermined the ongoing effort in other parts of the U.S. government to pinpoint the exact origins and nature of the coronavirus pandemic. From then on, journalists and politicians alike would conflate the false idea of the coronavirus being a Chinese bioweapon with the plausible idea that the virus had accidentally been released from the WIV lab, making it a far more politically loaded question to pursue. So let's take a quick break. We're reading this story in Politico that's explaining what this is an establishment-friendly outlet, and they're basically showing that this thing comes back, all roads lead back to the Wuhan lab that Steve Hilton talked about. I haven't seen them mention. They mentioned it just briefly. If you saw at the beginning of the story when I was reading it, the Politico story confirmed that the NIH was funding that Wuhan lab with the coronavirus research. But they didn't mention that Mr. Dr. Fauci, of course, was the guy pushing that money into EcoHealth Alliance, which then sent that money to the lab. So we'll continue in just a moment to unpack this live on A Neighbor's Choice.
David Gronowski here. Let me tell you about a man named Gabriel. Every day, Gabriel puts on his boots and drives across America to make sure our store shelves stay stocked with the food people count on. See, Gabriel served our country overseas. He knows that America stands for freedom, quality, and caring for others the way we would like to be treated. That's why when Gabriel saw food shelves getting low during the pandemic, he hit the road as a driver with Oakley Transport. In the land of the free, where no one should go hungry, we need heroes like Gabriel to help keep America fed. CDLA driving professionals, join Oakley Transport today. Keep America fed. Visit oakleytransport.com or call them today at 1-877-8-TANKER. That's 1-877-8-TANKER. Hello, this is David Gronowski with A Neighbor's Choice. I've got a mission for you. I'm a big believer in eating family farm-raised, high-quality grass-fed beef. That's why I'm a frequent customer of White Oak Pasture, a sixth-generation beautiful farm in southwest Georgia. Support sustainable, delicious meat of the highest quality. Ask for White Oak Pasture's beef at your local grocery here in Florida, or go to whiteoakpastures.com, and first-time customers get 20% off on purchases with our exclusive coupon code NEIGHBOR.
Are you ready to transform your career? Jess Smith was too. She was stuck on a job that was controlling her life, consuming her free time, and offering little opportunity for growing her pay. Then she found FinTech Mortgage Association, and she never looked back. FinTech Mortgage Association makes home lending simple, and they take care of home buyers like family. Using technology to make everyone's life easier, FinTech Mortgage Association equips each of their loan solutions architects with the tools they need to build a career with a schedule they control, a product they can take pride in, and an earning potential that is life-changing. Unleash your true potential. Join FinTech Mortgage Association. Visit finmay.com. That's FINMAE.com. You're in charge now.
NMLS ID 1492187. Equal housing lender.
My Neighbor's Choice returns. So I'm continuing with this Politico story because, again, Facebook decided to delete it when I wanted to share it. So we're going to broadcast the as much as we can of these articles. They deleted the story that I started with earlier about the Utah mom that dies 4 days after second dose of the Moderna vaccine. That was reported in CBS Salt Lake City affiliate. And we have a right to be able to report these stories. They're not going to be able to intimidate this Luddite mentality, these bozos. They don't know the first thing about science. and they think that we're all just going to roll over and let these people act like gods, that we can't share information. It's not about sharing information means one answer or the other. It means you need to be able to have the fullest picture possible. You can't let people bully you and say, okay, well, these drugs, they were rushed out to market. They're not FDA approved. How much of a gold standard that is, even, whatever, but they don't even have that. And they have legal immunity. The Moderna vaccine is a vaccine that has never been done before. But it's Moderna's first drug that they've put on the market. Their first drug, from what I understand. So it's their first shot at a drug. It's the first type of this vaccine that operates with the mRNA the way it does. And it stays with you for life. In the description I heard that was useful was it's like putting in a USB drive into your body where it can interact with the data of your DNA for life. What? First time Moderna companies had a drug on the market, from what I understand. And it's the first type of this kind of vaccine to come to market. And then this bigot, Mark Zuckerberg, wants to silence the voices of this Utah woman's family. 39-year-old single mom dies after getting her second dose of the Moderna vaccine 4 days after she's dead. Does that mean you should have a panic about it? No. But does that mean that you should be very deeply concerned when anti-science, anti-freedom, anti-human dignity outlets like Facebook want to get this kind of information blocked and intimidate anybody that links to these CBS stories? And they also blocked and tried to flag my account for sharing this Politico story that I'm reading now about this origins of this virus coming out of the Wuhan lab. And Steve Hilton, who we had on earlier this week from Fox News, his investigation showed that Dr. Fauci was the one providing the funding to EcoHealth Alliance, which was the company that then was funding this Wuhan lab for coronavirus gain of function research. And this guy is the highest paid federal employee. This guy is considered to be a sacred voice. So he's such a, think about this for a second. Let's just use some common sense for just a second here. The corporate media doesn't understand common sense. So all evidence points towards the Wuhan lab. This story says that there was a lot of cables sent warning about the conditions of the lab and the safety concerns that they had for the lab. Dr. Fauci was funding that despite those concerns, despite those cables. But he's the highest. So this is what it means to be the highest paid federal employee. You're lauded as a hero, but you're the guy who's taking other people's money, sending it to a third-party company that is sending our tax dollars to this Chinese lab to do gain-of-function research on coronavirus. And you ignore the cables coming out saying there are serious concerns about the safety standards at this lab. And this guy's the highest paid salaried employee in the United States government. This is the guy that's considered to be the hero. He is the incompetent one who financed the Chinese lab to do coronavirus gain-of-function research, despite the fact that their own government, the United States government, is saying there are serious security protocol issues here that makes this thing maybe not a good idea. But this genius, Dr. Fauci, is the guy that kept your money going there, that unleashed this whole thing. Because, of course, as the protocols, as the warning suggested, there were serious security issues with it. It wasn't They weren't having safety standards up to par. This isn't Politico, which is a very state-submitted, establishment-friendly outlet. So if they're reporting it, you know that it's it's not a stretch to make this claim. They're not going to make anybody in the establishment look bad. And of course, they're not connecting the Dr. Fauci part, but that's just in the facts. Go look at the facts. Go watch the report Steve Hilton did. Go to aneighborschoice.com and watch the Steve Hilton interview. It's a full hour where he meticulously lays out the facts. What kind of an upside down world do we live in where the guy who incompetently funded a lab that our own government was saying had serious safety standard issues with a most lethal, dangerous experimentation of viruses that could and have wiped out so many lives? And we live in such a dark time in which 3 or 4 corporations, including Facebook, don't even want to allow you to even know about that or the effects that are being reported by CBS in Utah for a 39-year-old woman who took a vaccine that was created as a result of the genius Dr. Fauci taking your money, pumping it into a Chinese lab that our own government said repeatedly had serious safety and security protocol issues. And this is the world you live in, where Dr. Fauci makes his rounds on all the Muppet YouTube channels to tell everybody what to do. You're going to listen to this guy? This is the incompetent idiot that took your money and had it continually fund the Wuhan lab to do coronavirus gain-of-function research, despite all the cables from our own government saying, this is not a good idea, this is not a secure lab, and what a cluster hell did he unleash because of his incompetence. And yet the media heralds this man as our savior. We are in an upside-down world, but we're going to ride it with the truth. Well, stay tuned. We'll be back in just a moment for Science and You, as well as Jeff Deist. But for now, Godspeed.
Your home for news, talk, and information. 1040 WHBO Pinellas Park. Tampa Bay's all new News Talk 1040.
It's the only way I get news.
From ABC News, I'm Michelle Franzen. As the nation marks 1 year since a global pandemic was declared, President Biden will make his first primetime address tonight, marking America's battle. More than 530,000 Americans have died, millions out of work. Earlier, the president put pen to paper his $1.9 trillion COVID relief bill, now law. Signed and soon to be delivered benefits, starting with those direct payments.
Very little happens fast in government, but some COVID relief payments just might.
Some people in the country will start seeing those in those direct deposits in their bank accounts this weekend.
White House spokesperson Jen Psaki saying those who have direct-to-bank payments will see their relief check first, but most Americans will get theirs by the end of the month. Andy Field, ABC News, Washington.
The House passed 2 gun background checks bills today aimed at closing loopholes on who can buy guns. ABC's Elizabeth Schulze explained.
Under current law, if a purchaser doesn't get immediate approval through the automatic background check system, the FBI has a maximum of 3 days to investigate. After that, the sale can proceed by default. The Charleston loophole bill would increase that window to 10 days. The second bill, called H.R. 8, would require universal background checks for all firearm purchases, including those made through unlicensed sellers online or at gun shows.
The investigation into New York's Governor Andrew Cuomo expanding, along with calls for him to resign.
The outside lawyers hired by the state attorney general to investigate Governor Cuomo's conduct established a website to collect relevant information. The public can submit tips and complaints, making clear the probe could expand beyond the known allegations. At least 6 women have accused Cuomo of impropriety, including a current state employee who, according to the Albany Times-Union, was summoned to the executive mansion and groped. The governor's office said it alerted police to the allegation after the woman declined to file a police report. Aaron Katersky, ABC News, New York.
You're listening to ABC News.
Cindy and her husband felt stuck paying annual fees on their timeshare. But what could they do?
We tried to sell it, but no results. No results at all.
Then they called Newton Group, and that's when things really started to happen.
We got a call within days. We never felt like they forgot us because we would get updates along the way.
Before long, they were free and clear.
We signed up with Newton Group in August, and it was a done deal by January.
And how's Cindy now?
We're very happy with Newton Group. It was a very, very positive experience for us, and we highly recommend them. And we are looking forward to not having to pay the $1,500 a year.
Do what Cindy did. Call Newton Group for your free consultation and free consumer's guide to timeshare exit. Call 877-TOP-EXIT. That's 877-TOP-EXIT. Newton Group has an A+ rating from the Better Business Bureau, so call them at 877-TOP-EXIT or visit newtonexit.com today.
U.S. climate envoy John Kerry wrapping up a swing through Europe to relaunch the transatlantic cooperation on climate change.
Following a meeting with French President Emmanuel Macron here in Paris, U.S. climate envoy John Kerry insisting,
"We had a very thorough discussion about how critical this moment is. And President Macron indicated that he wants to work with President Biden extremely closely."
President Biden rejoined the Paris Climate Accord on day one of his presidency. This week, Kerry was also in Brussels and London, where he met with British Prime Minister Boris Johnson and EU officials. Kerry becomes the first member of Biden's cabinet to have any face-to-face meetings with such leaders. Inez de la Cuetara, ABC News, Paris.
Chinese Olympic officials thinking ahead, making an offer to get athletes vaccinated.
China's Olympic Committee, which is hosting the 2022 Winter Games, is offering to make additional vaccine available to those who are taking part in either the Summer Olympics this year or the Winter Olympics next. The International Olympic Committee saying it will pay for the additional doses of vaccine for the Olympic and Paralympic teams, and for each dose it buys, it will pay for 2 more to go to that Olympic team's country for people in need. Alex Stone, ABC News.
Mississippi's Republican governor signing a bill today banning transgender athletes from competing on girls' or women's sports teams, becoming the first state this year to enact such a ban. This is ABC News.
Hello, friend Pat Boone here. Silver is creating lots of excitement. So I call my friends at Swiss America to get the scoop on whether this silver opportunity is for real. What I discovered blew my mind. It's all covered in a new silver report from Swiss America, which explains why silver prices cannot stay at this level for very long. Call 800-289-2646, 800-289-2646. Get a free copy of the silver report now.
Michelle Franzen, ABC News.
Who is your neighbor? Dave and Wally are team drivers for Oakley Transport. One day, they came across a very serious accident on the highway. Some might pass on by, but Dave and Wally saw there was no time to waste. They jumped into action and saved 2 people's lives with moments to spare. That's the kind of courageous love we need more of today. It reflects the respected culture Oakley Transport develops with their driving professionals. CDLA licensed drivers. Join Oakley Transport today for a rewarding career. Visit oakleytransport.com. That's oakleytransport.com.
From the heart of Central Florida, you're listening to the most electrifying show in media, A Neighbor's Choice. And I'm your host, your neighbor, David Gronowski. So glad to be back with you again for our second hour of today's broadcast. Maybe you're catching the first one just now, and we are glad to have you here. If it's your first time listening to our program, welcome you. This is the program where we challenge toxic groupthink in all of its forms and all of its sections as it continues to dominate so much of what we consider to be settled information. And that's not just in the world of politics, that's also in the world of science. So that means it's time for our Science and You segment. That's where you and science have a glorious dance of learning and understanding as we look at the physical world, take a break from the news of economics and culture and politics, and look at the world of physics and science, astronomy, cosmology. All kinds of different topics are available when we get into Science and You. And to do so, we have with us our Chief Science Advisor, Dr. Yu. How you doing?
Thank you, David, for having me on, and I'm doing great.
Well, it's so good to have you on. And let's get to the stories here. Let's see, there's a story in Popular Mechanics that says, surprise, Earth has a secret hidden layer. And this is a new study by Jennifer Lehman writes, a new study provides the best evidence yet for a hidden layer deep within Earth's solid inner core. Earth's inner core, made of solid iron and nickel, is roughly 2/3 the size of the moon. The researchers used machine learning to pinpoint the most accurate model of the strange physical processes that shape our planet's inner core. Earth's core is a strange place. For decades, scientists have suspected that, like the Matryoshka stacking dolls, there may be an additional hidden layer within our planet's solid iron and nickel inner core. Now, a new study has provided the strongest evidence yet for this mysterious layer, what researchers have dubbed Earth's inner core. The study, which appears in the Journal of Geophysical Research, Solid Earth, could help to rewrite Earth science textbooks and reshape our understanding of what lies beneath our feet. By studying the properties of the inner core, researchers can work to answer key questions about how Earth's protective magnetic field formed and what it may have in store for the future. So let's get into this, Dr. Yu. What are some of the things that we should learn from this story?
One thing we need to learn is why scientists are so interested in the structure of the Earth, because of the presence of the Earth's magnetic field. But how the because Earth's magnetic field protects us from the solar rays, right? From the radiations outside of the solar system or within the solar system from the sun. So that's a very important part of the mysteries. So want to solve. How to solve it? Try to study the structure of the Earth. So what this story tells us something a little bit new than we knew before. So we already know. So the Earth, besides the crust, and the mantles, right? And then we have an inner core. Well, we have a core, Earth's core. So within the Earth's core, so we said, okay, within the core we have called the outer core and the inner core. So the outer core is a molten liquid, molten core, which is like a liquid rotating around the inner core, which is made of iron and nickel. That's considered solid core. So this is basically the structure we know. However, in order to understand more about the mystery of the magnetic field formation, so geologists, So what they did, they study seismic event. When you have a seismic event, you have a generate a longitudinal seismic wave or transverse wave. So we study the speed of the wave. We can know is that within the solid core, we so-called the solid core, are they traveling in the same velocity if they are made by the same material or a same crystal, or different directions have a slightly different velocity? Traveling velocity indicate even both are made by crystal, iron and nickel crystal, but direction will be different. So then have a faster traveling direction versus slower direction, so we can detect if they are the same layer or they have multiple layers. In this case, so they find that within the solid inner core, so they find that there's within that core still have another core called the inner core. So how did they discover that? Because they find out that the speed in different directions along the north and the south direction, that's the Earth's rotating axis, is a little bit faster than normal. Normally it should be a little bit faster than the speed along the on the plane of the equator. But in this case, they found, at one location, we find that it's not the exact case. What that means? That means the crystal structure within the inner core, inside inner core versus the outer inner core, the direction different. So that's why we see structure different. So that means, we understand the Earth's structure a little furthermore. That's what a structure part. So I want to explain this one, say how Earth's magnetic field forms. That might be beneficial to the audience. We know, number one, in order to have a magnetic field, one way to have magnets, we have called permanent magnets inside the Earth. Let's assume the iron nickel, if it's a permanent magnetic, magnets, of course, it will generate a magnetic field. However, we know Earth's magnetic field has been changing the direction, right? Reversed many times. So we know that. So if the permanent magnets cannot be fixed along the north-south direction all the time. So then we know. So another way to have a magnetic field is we have an iron nickel core inside. However, outer core, we have a liquid molten liquid metal rotating. So that rotation, molten liquid metal, forming a charge called electromagnetic current. When they're rotating along an iron nickel core in the beginning, so they generate electromagnetic field. So that means that's the way they can also generate a magnetic field. So that's why we normally see North and the South Pole are the strongest along the magnetic axis. It is because Earth is rotating almost about that pole. So that's when you're rotating around that pole and you generate a magnetic field on the north and south. However, I wanted to explain sometimes magnetic field can reverse, right? So what kind of condition can make Earth's magnetic field reverse directions? One way, if you're rotating the iron core, that's the inner solid iron core. If you're rotating that one, and without changing Earth's rotating direction, if the inner core, because it's floating inside of a molten liquid core, if that rotating direction, then you will see Earth's magnetic field reversed. But people might ask, another way to make a reverse of Earth's magnetic field, if your Earth's rotating direction, if a rotation direction change, you would see Earth's magnetic field reverse. And there's a third case is if sun's magnetic field are rotating, then Earth's magnetic field could be rotating with them. That's it.
Wow. That's interesting. So I want to move on to another story real quick while we just have just limited time. It says here a robotic skin with flexible magnetic film could improve artificial touch. Robots are clumsy, but pliable magnetized skin could help them mimic touch better. A team of researchers from the City University of Hong Kong, South University of Science and Technology in Shenzhen, and Carnegie Mellon University of Pittsburgh have published a science robotics study on robotic tactile sensing, which Wired reports could improve the sense of touch in machines. Researchers say that touch sensitivity can be achieved to a reliable degree in robots by using a pliable, magnetized film on a robotic fingertip to essentially replicate the way human skin works. To give the robot skeletal support of the sort bones give fingers, the team used a circuit board covered in magnetic sensors. If you press down on the robotic fingertip, the sensor note a depression in the skin of the tip, register the location, and relay that tactile feedback to the computer. That sounds similar to what you explained about human touch, right?
Yes, so I'm so excited. I did not read this article. That's fantastic. That's exactly what a human skin works. That's human. We often tell, skin has a magnetic sensor, has a sensor or something inside. I do not believe that's truly the we feel being touched. Is because I have a sensor, some kind of a neurological sensor in the spot. If you think about it, when you can touch any place in your skin, and so you will feel so you'll be. If that's what you feel, right? If you use this called the sensor analogy, so the sensor has to be cover every single point in the skin. How could that happen? No. So my explanation, I believe, is 7 years ago? Oh no, almost 8 years ago. My explanation: skin itself, just like it's a skin made by cell made by magnetic particles, right? Magnets. So whenever you touch anything, what happens? Touch skin, the every cell changing the shape. Have pressure, changing the shape. When you changing the shape, you create what? You create the excitation of called electrical current in your skin. And that current, because you're changing the direction, all the magnetic particles alignment were changing. That's where not only your head will feels being touched, every part of your body will feels, oh my goodness, some were being touched. So that's exactly what this study tried to do. They said that they use magnetic some sheet of magnetic sheet, soft. If you touch any place, what happens? You create electrical current. That's the signal. And you press higher, harder, or softer, you create the motion and create signal. So that's where the sensing. So that's why I include the human skin sensing ability for robots. So that's another confirmation. So our human sensing is a magnetic phenomenon. Whenever you touch any part of your body, your field feels not just your brain, your every body part will feel somewhere changing, attached. Because if you have a group of magnets connected together, what happens if you change one magnet? Entire field will change. So entire particles in your body will adjust. So that motion creates a feeling.
Let's take a quick break. We're listening to Science and You, our science segment that we do each week on A Neighbor's Choice Radio. We're here with our Chief Science Advisor, physicist, Dr. Yu. We'll be right back after this short break.
Hello, this is David Gronowski with A Neighbor's Choice. I've got a mission for you. I'm a big believer in eating family farm-raised, high-quality grass-fed beef. That's why I'm a frequent customer of White Oak Pasture, a 6th-generation beautiful farm in southwest Georgia. Support sustainable, delicious meat of the highest quality. Ask for White Oak Pasture's beef at your local grocery here in Florida, or go to whiteoakpastures.com, and first-time customers get 20% off on purchases with our exclusive coupon code NEIGHBOR.
Are you ready to transform your career? Jess Smith was too. She was stuck on a job that was controlling her life, consuming her free time, and offering little opportunity for growing her pay. Then she found FinTech Mortgage Association, and she never looked back. FinTech Mortgage Association makes home lending simple, and they take care of home buyers like family. Using technology to make everyone's life easier, FinTech Mortgage Association equips each of their loan solutions architects with the tools they need to build a career with a schedule they control, a product they can take pride in, and an earning potential that is life-changing. Unleash your true potential. Join FinTech Mortgage Association. Visit finmay.com. That's FINMAE.com. You're in charge now.
NMLS ID 1492187, Equal Housing Lender.
A lawsuit is not something that anyone looks forward to. It's a stressful process. There are attorneys in Tampa Bay that keep clients well informed, creating less stress. That law firm is Catania. Personal injury law is defended with full disclosure. There is no guessing game. If it's an auto accident, medical malpractice, nursing home negligence, unsafe working conditions, or motorcycle accidents, the law firm of Catania will handle the process worry-free from start to finish. Many victims don't realize they have a claim for the loss until they talk to Catania. They only represent private individuals and treat every case as if it's going to trial. Putting families first is more than just a slogan. It's their way of practicing law. It's a commitment to you. Remember, they don't get paid if you don't get paid. So go to Catania.com. Over 28 years in practice. Catania, personal injury, auto, and motorcycle accident attorneys. Catania, putting families first.
Office Tampa. Not attorney spokeswoman.
A lot has happened that has prevented us from feeling like a community. Well, now that things have opened up a bit, let's get back to basics. As a foundation for our neighbors and family, God is a big part of bringing us together. It's time to get back to church. Uplifting, supporting, and loving neighbors that are cherished, not only now, but for eternity. Come on, you can use it. The Welcoming Committee is there every Sunday. See you soon.
Welcome back to A Neighbor's Choice. I'm your host, David Gronowski. We're live, coming to you on video stream. We had a little video issue, but we've got that worked out now, so you can enjoy video if you like that. Go to aneighborschoice.com or search for David Gronowski on YouTube. And we're doing our Science and You segment now with our Chief Science Advisor, Dr. Yu. And Dr. Yu, you know, last week, Joe Biden got some attention. He called everybody Neanderthals who didn't agree with his politics, you know, and it brought to mind this story that I saw in sapiens.org. It says, did a magnetic field reversal doom Neanderthals? And the story is that a Neanderthal expert weighs in on a new theory that proposes a swap in the planet's poles triggered a climate catastrophe that killed off our evolutionary cousins. So the idea, I guess, is that if you have a magnetic pole swap, it could change the environment, that make it an atmospheric catastrophe that might make Neanderthals not be able to, I guess, compete as effectively as Homo sapien cousins of theirs. Have you looked into this? What do you think of this type of stuff? You know, I've talked to you before about magnetic pole shifts, and you've always seemed to think like they're not that big of a, we shouldn't worry about them. But maybe that wiped out Neanderthals, huh?
It could be indirectly, because of a shift of magnetic field may confuse the direction. So if they have to rely on certain direction to survive, so now they lost to habitat in that direction, and then could be end up in the disaster place. I don't believe there's a direct connection. However, indirect connection is possible.
By the way, I have a question for you. Know, I know you're a physicist, so you're not supposed to be able to make claims about this. So don't worry if you don't. Do you think that Neanderthals had dreams?
Oh, I do believe yes.
Do you believe?
So what's?
Do you believe Do you believe that they experienced emotions like humans did, or different, or what do you think, based on?
That's hard. For me, I do believe. Let's say I do believe. Apes, monkeys, and even tigers, even those farm-raised animals, I do believe they are experiencing the same kind of feeling and psychological cycles, just like a human. Wow. So in general, I do believe that they dream too, just like human.
Yeah, because I don't think it's appropriate to make fun of Neanderthals because they don't exist anymore, and it's like they had dreams and feelings too.
Yes, I agree with you.
I think it's an interesting time we live in because there's a lot of people who are saying the best is behind us in terms of our scientific breakthroughs. Do you believe that we've done all the greatest breakthroughs in science and now we've kind of reached the end of scientific breakthroughs and discovery, Dr. Yu?
No, never. It's far from it. The future should be much, much better.
Yeah.
We can create so many new things with a new understanding of science.
By the way, I saw recently they're worried. You know, I saw that they're wanting to cancel Isaac Newton now. Isaac Newton is in trouble. There's a story. Isaac Newton canceled? Elite schools drop his name from physics laws over racism and slammed him as ludicrous. So now, can you believe that's happening?
Oh, in this social sphere, I see so many things happening beyond my imagination. Yes, I do believe certain sector could happen, but I think this is completely misguided. Your personal feelings, social status mixed with the truth and the fact. I think this is outblown.
Yeah. They said we don't want to call them Newton's laws anymore, as we call them the 3 fundamental laws of physics, because they need to decenter the whiteness that is represented by Isaac Newton. This seems like a dark time to me.
Right. We should recognize whoever contributed to the history of the science, maybe the universe, the science of the entire universe. So we're human beings. We might be the only species carrying on our missions. And those are greatest scientists. Isaac Newton is my role model, the very first role model till today. So I feel like, it's ridiculous.
Yeah. Well, hopefully this current temperature that we're in that is so anti-science does not take over and sweep over the culture, because as you said, there's so much work that's need to be done in the field of innovation and energy and innovation and transportation. And I hope that we can prevail in providing that innovation. So hopefully you and I can help contribute to kickstarting a renaissance.
Thank you so much.
So glad to have you on, Dr. Yu. Thanks again for joining us. And that's it for Science and You. You can find every Science and You episode on aneighborschoice.com. That's our website. Up next, we'll hear from the president of the Mises Institute, Jeff Deist. Don't miss it.
Ronald Reagan would turn over in his grave if he saw what's going on today.
Crazy things are happening.
You cannot be afraid. You've got to stand up for what you believe is right.
But one thing is for sure.
You can't trust anybody.
For talk, news, and information, you can count on us.
Enough is enough. I mean, I almost blew a gasket.
Good for the country.
I know what I'm talking about. A lot of wackos out there.
Your connection to talk about it. The all-new News Talk 1040, WHPO.
It's now law. The big COVID relief bill signed a day earlier than planned by President Biden on the one-time stimulus checks. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki.
Some people in the country will start seeing those direct deposits in their bank accounts this weekend, and payments to eligible Americans will continue throughout the course of the next several weeks.
Marking his rescue plan being enacted and 1 year since COVID shutdowns began, President Biden will deliver his first primetime address at 8 Eastern Time tonight. All COVID restrictions on events and requirements to wear a mask in state buildings will be removed starting tomorrow, says Oklahoma Governor Coven. Some Democrats are making a new push for the first major gun laws in more than 2 decades. Legislation passed by the House would require background checks on all firearm sales and transfers and allow an expanded 10-day review for gun purchases. It now heads to the politically evenly split Senate. An update on Wall Street for the major indexes. Chuck Sievertson, ABC News.
Welcome back to A Neighbor's Choice. I'm your host, David Gronowski. We're broadcasting on FM and AM across coast to coast around Florida, which is the new kind of home base for a lot of liberty. And speaking of liberty, we have with us the president of the Mises Institute, which is the country's leading voice for free market education and understanding of how markets work. Jeff Deist, the president, joins us now. Jeff, how you doing?
Hey, David. Well, you know, I heard during the break that Congress just passed the COVID relief bill, so we'll get a couple $1 trillion relieving all of us of something. I guess we won't have to worry about COVID anymore.
Yeah, we're all good to go. They're very excited. ABC, you can hear they're gleeful. They're like little state media PR firms. They say, "Oh, Mr. Biden, he did it for you," and they're very gleeful and excited. But you're an economist, right? I mean, this is what you do. You study economics with the Mises Institute. Is this going to help us? Is this exactly what the doctor ordered from your perspective?
You know, it's so funny, as though you can just spend your way out of things. I've read some various mathematical breakdowns where the amount of spending contained in the bill, if you just divide it by the number of Americans in the country, we could all get like $8,000 or something. But instead, some people, I think, will get $1,400 or $2,000 or whatever they'll get. And then the rest of it will go into the atmosphere. And we all know that there'll be lots and lots of little hidden spending measures, just like with last year's so-called CARES Act, which was passed in towards the end of March, right after COVID became apparent. And that contained all kinds of pork belly spending for things like the Kennedy Center, which is the performing arts place there in D.C. I mean, you know, it's just more of the same. And so it's remarkable to me that on the one hand, you have a media saying that, you know, America has become so divided and that America has become so divisive, and that the rhetoric and the ideology is really ratcheted up. But on the other side of things, it's just absolute business as usual. The only thing worse than a spending bill in Washington is an emergency spending bill, one that's passed ostensibly for something like after 9/11 or after a pandemic or after the financial crisis of 2007. So this is when a lot of committees, congressional committees, get together. Not even the member of Congress you voted for, not even the U.S. representative or senator you voted for, but their staffs get together and glom together these huge bills. And oftentimes lobbyists get in their ears and insert little tiny line items, you know, just change this semicolon here, little, 3I dash whatever, and then insert a certain industry, a certain company, whatever. And, you know, you and I are never going to read that bill in its entirety. The people who vote on it are never going to read it in its entirety. And so, you know, as much political upheaval as there seems to be that the media feeds us to keep us distracted, the underlying reality is just absolutely unchanged.
So let me ask you, there's a debate amongst folks who are conservative or libertarian or whatever, that some people have said, you know, look, the right answer is that the conservatives or Republicans need to be pushing for more direct payments, and that's why they're losing to the left, is because they're stuck on old-fashioned Reagan supply-side economics, trickle-down, whatever the word they use. And so a new Republican Party needs to be getting out, like they would say, okay, the Republicans lost both seats in Georgia partly because of McConnell not wanting to go along with that $2,000 paycheck that Trump wanted to do. And then there's another side that says, no, we should just hold the line. This is reckless spending. And that's where we need to keep that kind of mentality, or that kind of frame. And that's, of course, hypocritical too, because all the people who vote against that spending, they will spend, $700 billion on a handout to the Pentagon like they did with Trump, and nobody bats an eye. So how do you sort through that? You got hypocrites that say, this is too much spending, I'm voting against it. And then you got other folks in the Republican movement who are saying, no, we need to issue more of these checks and just embrace this thing if we want to have a chance to deal with the cultural nihilists on the left.
Yeah, it's a tough question, because on the one hand, politics is war. by other means, and war requires strategy, tactics. And so I can understand the argument says, look, they're creating all this funny money, whether they're doing it through monetary policy at the Fed or whether they're doing it through fiscal policy via the Treasury and Congress. And, they're going to do it anyway. Let's at least get some for average people, and let's not be naive about how politics works. And so there are conservatives saying that, this whole thing's going to blow up on our face if we continue to simply create money, which effectively is what a bill like this does, because no one's pulling it out of from us in the form of taxes. Look, I get both sides of this, but the point is that, real politic isn't working. This idea that we can sort of continue on and on and have the U.S. dollar be the world's reserve currency and not have to worry too much about this stuff. What strikes me is we ought to be understanding how depraved all of this is, how unusual, how uncivilized it is. In other words, it's not just politics as usual. It's something more than that. Politics has always been dirty, and politics has always been fatal and lethal. But now it's happening on a scale. The megalomaniacal nature of what people think we can do with respect to creating money is really something different, because I think a lot of Americans have simply become divorced from reality. They think that government can create prosperity by legislative action, that we can just sort of will into existence a greater degree of prosperity, or at least a lesser degree of a recession or whatever. And that's a very dangerous and almost messianic impulse. And when you talk about the spending, David, here's the sad part, is that the so-called defense spending, the DoD spending, which is almost $1 trillion per year at this point, and then you add in Social Security and Medicare, which are both about $1 trillion each, and you've got some huge percentage, well over half the federal budget, is basically politically untouchable, because there are huge constituencies for all. And so when you start talking about, oh my gosh, Congress wastes all this money, we have all this ridiculous spending, like earlier I mentioned some boondoggle to spruce up the inside of the Kennedy Center in D.C. All of that is a drop in the bucket. When Senator Rand Paul talks about some ridiculous expenditure for some study, on the mating habit of some bird or something, we can laugh at that, and we can sort of chuckle and say, yeah, that really sort of affirms my worldview that Congress is wasteful. But unless and until you're willing to talk about defense, Social Security, and Medicare, right, I would argue you're not serious about spending, and you're not serious about the size and scope of government.
Right.
And yet we live in a world where anybody running for president, especially, but any federal office, House or Senate, who talks about cutting defense, Social Security, or Medicare, is basically in a position of being a non-starter. That right. They won't get any traction as a candidate. So that's on us, David. At some point, that is on us, and we have to say, you know what? If an older person has $3 million, maybe they don't need that $1,500 check every month from the federal government, even though they paid into it, for example. Maybe we don't need to be in 90 odd countries around the world with our military. These kinds of hard questions, we can't offload them onto the political class. We have to ask them of ourselves. That was what I would argue today.
Right. It's one of those things that, some have said, hey, look, yeah, it's not good to print money out of thin air to give direct payments, but if everybody else in the world economy is even worse off than we are, the dollar doesn't have any problem in the near future. So go ahead and keep giving those direct checks. That's what the right needs to do to tactically stay in the game with the left. It's just interesting to think if there's any reality to that, because we are in an unprecedented time in the world economy, with everything that's being done to it from governments.
Yes, it is unprecedented, and we just assume that the U.S. is going to be the boss of that world economy, especially coming out of COVID. And that's been a pretty safe assumption, honestly, for the last 100 years. The question is, what if that changed? And well, the answer is, if that changed, we'd all be a lot poorer. If the dollar was not the world's reserve currency, if it wasn't used so broadly around the world, there would be less demand for it, which would mean we would be less able to effectively export our inflation. Congress would have to spend less. It would have to have a more rational connection between the amount of taxes it actually takes in and the amount it spends each year. That could threaten entitlements. That could threaten all kinds of federal jobs from military on down. And that would be that would represent a rough period in American history. I guarantee you that much. So we ought to be thinking about these things. And even if we're not thinking about them for ourselves, we ought to be thinking about them for our kids and grandkids.
Yeah, it's one of those things that it doesn't get enough attention, the downstream effects to national spending that you're talking about. Almost nobody's talking about that in left and right discourse today. But, one thing that we've been looking at, you mentioned the all of this has to do with the outbreak of the pandemic and the political response to it, how it's destroyed world economies. We had Steve Hilton on, who's the Fox News host. We had him on earlier this week for a full-hour interview I did with him, where he reported on his investigation he's been doing, in which he was tracing that Dr. Fauci, with the National Institutes for Health, was funding gain-of-function coronavirus research in the Wuhan lab over in China. And that eventually he ended up having the money go to a third company, EcoHealth Alliance, run by Peter Daszak, who was then funneling that money back to the Wuhan lab to do gain-of-function research lab. Jeff, I just want to get your comment. Obviously, we haven't been able to have direct evidence of exactly how this virus came about, but there's more and more evidence piling up that it points towards that Wuhan lab. And I think it's an outrage, and I think it should be the biggest story in the world, that the guy that they have been heralding as the hero for all of this thing could be the guy who incompetently funded a Chinese lab for these reckless coronavirus gain-of-function research. And the reason why I call it reckless is by their own standards. In Politico, they just had a story out 3 days ago that says, in 2018, diplomats warned of the risky coronavirus experiments in Wuhan lab, but no one listened. So the highest paid federal employee on the books is Dr. Fauci. And this is the genius who is the guy taking your money, giving it to EcoHealth Alliance, which then gives it to the Wuhan lab, despite cables coming back saying their safety and security protocols are not reliable. This guy should be the one that's investigated with criminal incompetence or negligence to take our tax dollars and unleash this stupid virus across the whole world. And yet he's considered a hero.
Well, a lot of people were dismissive of the concept of the deep state. And you have to ask yourself, why didn't Trump get rid of Fauci? Why didn't he fire him? And the answer is he couldn't. And why couldn't he? Well, there's some reason that would have hurt Trump politically or otherwise. And so, we look at things like the CIA, which Harry Truman, who created it, was quite candid in his own memoirs about having regretted it and creating something that presidents couldn't control. I mean, this is commonplace now. This is something that we all have to understand and accept, that administrative agencies in Washington, D.C., are the government. Not the people we elect aren't the government. The administrative agencies don't much listen, frankly, to what Congress or a president says. So, when it comes to Fauci, when it comes to understanding what happened with this virus, whether it indeed originated in the lab or not, I mean, you can't believe what you read. I don't know the story of this virus because I wasn't there, but here's what I do know, is that sometimes years and years later, whether we're talking about World War II and the Pearl Harbor attacks, whether we are talking about the Kennedy assassination, whether we're talking about events in 9/11, years and years later, things are declassified and come out in Congress openly that often, change or directly even contradict what we thought we knew. So, there's an official story surrounding COVID and how it developed and how it spread, and that may be the case. But if it isn't the case, you shouldn't be surprised, because they lie and cover things up so often. I mean, why? They can hardly complain when this spawns conspiracies.
And this is in the Politico too. This is not even InfoWars talking about this. So I mean, it's something that even the state allied media is reporting on, and yet nobody seems to be getting enough attention for it. So hopefully we'll keep talking about it, and maybe someday there'll be some more attention to this, so we can kind of know who causes this stuff. It certainly wasn't people eating pangolin, apparently. We'll take a quick break and return. We're speaking with Jeff Deist of the Mises Institute. Their website is mises.org. You can also follow Jeff at Jeff Deist on Twitter to keep up with his comments. Tina just said, Jeff Deist is brilliant. I think Trump feared massive backlash if he fired Fauci. I agree, Tina. We'll return in just a moment with more comments from Jeff Deist.
Hello, this is David Gronowski with A Neighbor's Choice. I've got a mission for you. I'm a big believer in eating family farm-raised, high-quality, grass-fed beef. That's why I'm a frequent customer of White Oak Pasture, a sixth-generation beautiful farm in southwest Georgia. Support sustainable, delicious meat of the highest quality. Ask for White Oak Pasture's beef at your local grocery here in Florida, or go to whiteoakpastures.com, and first-time customers get 20% off on purchases with our exclusive coupon code NEIGHBOR.
A lawsuit is not something that anyone looks forward to. It's a stressful process. There are attorneys in Tampa Bay that keep clients well informed, creating less stress. That law firm is Catania. Personal injury law is defended with full disclosure. There is no guessing game. If it's an auto accident, medical malpractice, nursing home negligence, unsafe working conditions, or motorcycle accidents, the law firm of Catania will handle the process worry-free from start to finish. Many victims don't realize they have a claim for the loss until they talk to Catania. They only represent private individuals and treat every case as if it's going to trial. Putting families first is more than just a slogan. It's their way of practicing law. It's a commitment to you. Remember, they don't get paid if you don't get paid. So go to Catania.com. Over 28 years in practice. Catania, personal injury, auto, and motorcycle accident attorneys. Catania, putting families first.
Office Tampa. Not attorney spokeswoman.
Welcome back to A Neighbor's Choice. Coast to coast across Florida, the Sunshine State, the heart of the new liberty movement that's building and growing. People who are tired of the anti-human, anti-science approach that DC has continue to look to Florida as a beacon of possible hope for the long term. Hopefully it can be a bulwark against the madness of central planning. We're joined by Jeff Deist of the Mises Institute, who speaks a lot about the folly of centralized government, centralized command and control society. And it's something that we need to continually keep at the forefront of how we look at things, and not just get caught up in always reacting to whatever they're doing, but actually having a positive vision for how to build society in a better, more humane way. Jeff, speaking of a humane society, this is in nottheb.com, so I guess it means it's real. It's a report. Proposed California curriculum teaches decolonization of America and counter genocide against white Christians, and has students chant to the Aztec god of human sacrifice. And this is a report from the Discovery Institute's Christopher Rufo about the idea that they've got the children chanting in unison the name of the Aztec god, because apparently back in the day, it was a horrible thing that the Christians committed theocide against the indigenous tribes' gods and replacing them with Christianity. And so they want to chant those names. Come on back, you know? What do you think of this?
Well, I did see that. Christopher Rufo is a very important critic of critical race theory, and he's doing some exposés on what critical race theory really is and really teaches, and some stuff that might be accepted by your local school curriculum and parents aren't really aware of it. In California, I mean, because of its proximity to what we now call Mexico, I think there's an argument I certainly am interested in, and having studied both Aztec and Mayan cultures. They're fascinating. They were brutal in their own ways. They certainly weren't somehow morally superior to the Spanish colonists. I don't believe in terms of their actions. And of course, just last year, we saw Father Junipero Serra pulled down. His statues are in several places around California. There's a trail of Spanish missions, which were designed to be about a day's horse ride apart, stretching up through Baja California into San Diego, and there are several all the way up into San Francisco. There's a series of missions which are all still there, and they have cemeteries. So many of them are very beautiful. And of course, up until just a decade ago, a generation ago, Father Junipero Serra was considered a hero throughout California. There are streets named after him, and as I mentioned, there are statues of him, but that all has to be changed now because this new crowd has this year zero mentality, where everything that happened in the past has to be judged by the ultra woke standards of today. I think it's a dangerous ideology. It's a dangerous mentality, and this is the kind of thing we're up against. I mean, we're trying to be educational in our own efforts. We're trying to teach, especially young people, but everyone, about markets, about property, about civilization, about how we got rich and how we could not be rich anymore. I consider these, important existential questions. And as we're trying to do this, we have just abject nonsense, which we're up against, and erasing, or trying to paint the history of California in such stark black and white terms just strikes me as a terrible disservice to kids. And parents better wake up. They better be pulling their kids out of these schools, even if that's difficult to do. I understand that's easier said than done, financially and otherwise. But you got to do something. And sending your children into these charnel houses to be, turned into hateful robots, I think, is a huge mistake.
Yeah, it's something that is not going to go in a good direction. I can say that, because if we're going to go back to chanting sacrificial gods, we're not going to head in the right direction. I can assure you, because people don't understand anthropology. They don't understand human history and the record that those gods were not just having grapes and wines. Those gods were stand-ins for sacrifice, and that's what we're going to continue to see, people wanting to vent their wrath onto common scapegoats if this continues to be the rule of the day. But this leads me to my the story I saw that you published at your website, Mises.org. It says, why the state won't tolerate independence for Christianity. And we'll just have a little bit of time here, but just kind of give us what you got from this article by your author, Zachary Yost. Is that right? Yost? Am I pronouncing his name right?
Well, it's very, very interesting. A lot of people have written about this and drawn parallels between sort of the new progressive ethos, which is, although aggressively secular, seems to have all the trappings of religion. It has sacred texts, it has doctrine, it has high priests, it has excommunication for heresy, it has infidels. So, there are huge parallels here, because as America becomes less and less Christian, I think unless you don't understand human nature, you realize that something has to fill that void in that vacuum. And so I think the state and politics in general have risen as religion and civil society has fallen away in importance, and I don't think that's a coincidence. And I think people are turning more and more to this collective idea of socialism, or, we're all in this together through state power, whether that's COVID or the economy or whatever. And I think that becomes a faith-based institution. People who believe in things without evidence. And, that's one thing when you believe in, let's say, supernatural biblical events, you accept that as faith. That's what faith requires. But when you start to say, hey, socialism can work if we do it differently than the Chinese or the Soviets, or fascism can work if we do it differently than, the Italians or the Germans, I think you're getting into a very dangerous territory there. And so the piece which Zach Yost wrote, which I recommend to people, it's at the top or near the top of Mises.org right now, really talks about how the state doesn't like competition for hearts and minds. It doesn't like it when people have loyalties to, let's say, their home state or to their family or to their religious practice or to their, whatever civic or social institutions. People who believe in government, people whom we call statists, really want the state to be not only the primary organizing principle in society, but also the institution to which people give their loyalty. And that's the definition of fascism, nothing outside the state. That's what Mussolini said. So this is sick. And just because it might take the form of that nice soccer mom down the street, tweeting something she read in the New Republic or Jacobin, just because it takes a familiar form and it's not a goose-stepping brown shirt, doesn't make it any less sick or any less of a threat, frankly.
Right. It's definitely something that Christianity and the state are going to be like oil and water, because Christianity says it challenges the state and it mocks the state. In the death of Christ, Caiaphas says it's better that one man die than the whole nation perish. And that's considered a villainous thing to say, right? And that's kind of the heart of the state, isn't it? It's okay to sacrifice some for the greater good. Yeah. Well, hey, Jeff, it's always great talking to you. I really enjoy the articles that you continue to publish at Mises.org. It's not just politics, as we just discovered. It also includes understanding the state's relationship to culture and religion, and that's very important. So thank you again for joining us.
Thank you.
And for folks who want to stay in touch, go to Mises.org. That's MISES.org for more content from Jeff Deist and his team there. And for us, we're signing off. You can email me hello@aneighborschoice.com for feedback. I'm David Gronowski. Godspeed.